Welcome to our book launch for Avaton, presented by the Maliotis Cultural Center and Somerset Hall Press. My name is Dean Papadimitriou. I'm the founder and publisher of Somerset Hall Press, which publishes literary and scholarly books with a focus on Greek studies. At another event recently, the person who introduced me pointed out that my interest in books was kindled and developed in a family that highly respects books. An example of this respect is that my parents, Reverend Dr. George C. and Presbytera Thanasia Papadimitriou, who are here today, recently donated their collection of 5,000 volumes of theology and philosophy books to the St. Sophia Ukrainian Orthodox Seminary in New Jersey. Thank you. So, as publisher of Somerset Hall Press, I have had the honor of promoting Greek literature, scholarship, and culture, and the pleasure of working with several outstanding authors. One of these authors is Vassiliki Rapti, who is an essential part of today's program. I will introduce her before the poetry reading, but I want to mention that we have now worked on several book projects together, including her poetry collection, Transitorium, her translation of the play Nightfall Hotel, a surrealist Romeo and Juliet by Maliotis, and her translation of today's featured poetry collection, Avaton, by Dimitrios BAFALOUKOS. We recently collaborated on two programs related to Nightfall Hotel. Nightfall Hotel was originally written in French by Maliotis, a Greek author who was part of the surrealist circle of André Breton in Paris in the 1950s. In November, I moderated an academic panel discussion about this play at the Modern Greek Studies Association Symposium at Stockton University in New Jersey, and Vassiliki gave one of the learned papers. In February, we presented a special Valentine's program in New York with a performance of Nightfall Hotel. In fact, it was the New York premiere of this play. Peter Bottéas, who will also be reading today, was one of the actors in this performance. We hope to bring a production of the play to Boston in the future. Which brings us to today's book launch. The word Avaton in Greek means a place in which one cannot step foot, a place on which one cannot walk, hence an unapproachable and inaccessible place. The poems in Avaton explore this inaccessible place, yet they try to help us reach it. Professor Peter Bien, our keynote speaker today, said this about Avaton. An observer of life since childhood, prominent oncologist Dimitris BAFALOUKOS wrote poems that operated therapeutically on his soul. By overcoming that soul's Avaton, an impediment commonly thought to render a mountain inaccessible or a roadway impassable, yet no Avaton relinquishes all its power. These poems, despite memorably overcoming so much secrecy and silence, convince us that our soul lives will always remain inaccessible. The author, Dimitris BAFALOUKOS, is an oncologist and poet in Athens. In this collection of poems, the author, with the precision of a surgeon, simultaneously wields brush and stylus, capturing moments of anguished love which sometimes triumph beyond the wounds and sometimes remain unfulfilled. His poems are amplified and illustrated by 13 vivid paintings by artist Dimitris Mytaras in an innovative poetico-visual dialogue. You can see one of his paintings projected right now. Dimitris Mytaras, who died just last year, was a painter and a member of the Academy of Athens. He received the Harvard University Award for Greek Civilization. I would now like to read a message from Dimitris BAFALOUKOS. He says, "I wish this day had wings, so that I could make the distance disappear and be able to be near you, to absorb the atmosphere that only people of spirit like all of you create. I want to extend a big thank you to Vassiliki Rapti for her immeasurable support and for her excellent translation, and to the publisher Dean Papadimitriou and the poet Yosif Yosifidis for their faultless work. I will always have as a keepsake in my soul the honor given to me by Professor Peter Bien, who is lecturing on my poetry, Peter Bottéas, who is reciting my poems, Andy Milas, who is offering his musical composition, and Lee Thames and the Maliotis Cultural Center, which is opening its doors to us. My heart is full of gratitude for all of you who are here today. I thank you all warmly, Dimitris BAFALOUKOS. And before we get to the poetry reading, we have the great honor of hearing from today's keynote speaker. I would like to introduce Peter Bien. Peter Bien is Professor of English and Comparative Literature Emeritus at Dartmouth College. He has translated the works of Nikos Kazantzakis, including the famous novels Zorba the Greek and The Last Temptation of Christ. He has also authored many other books. Please join me in welcoming Professor Peter Bien.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to give a little introduction, and I hope it won't be very long. I want to speak about what this ceremony is doing. And I think the first thing it's doing, I hope I'm right, is that literary culture, according to what's happening here, is still alive in Greece. You always hear lamentations about the lack of readers in Greece. Every time I go, everyone says, oh, nobody reads books anymore in Greece. You hear about emigration of artists and intellectuals, and I know that's somewhat true. You hear about the closing of bookstores. Estia closed. That was horrid. Of course, all that happens. But we have the same lamentations here. There used to be a dozen specialized bookstores on Lower Park Avenue in New York. Only one remains in the area now. But what is it? It's the Strand bookstore on Broadway and 12th, which is flourishing. The last time I was there, it was just overwhelmed with people. People in Greece keep telling me that the publisher Kastaniottis is no more. But it's not no more. I get new books advertised every day practically on the internet from Kastaniottis. And when one visits the annual festival on the Peripeto of Thessaloniki, there are dozens and dozens of small presses displaying their wares and all publishing even poetry. That's the second thing this ceremony should tell us, that poetry is alive in Greece, no matter what one says. A year ago, my colleague and friend Karen Van Dyke published a translated collection called Austerity Measures. It includes the work of 49 poets, work that appeared not just or even primarily where you expect in literary journals, but, and I'm quoting now from her introduction, poets writing graffiti on walls, poets reading in public squares, theaters, and empty lots, poets chanting slogans and singing songs at rallies, poets blogging, posting on the internet, poets teaching workshops to school children and migrants. Clearly, poetry is alive in contemporary Greece. Lots of practitioners, even more than the 49 who have recently been translated and anthologized. Dimitrios BAFALOUKOS, for example, is not included. He's another one. Is he a poet? Well, we're told he's an oncologist. Indeed, a very distinguished professor of oncology, with 267 medical publications bearing titles, I hope I can pronounce these words, titles such as The Prognostic Significance of Distant Metastasis-Free Interval in Mutant Advanced Melanoma Patients. And he has 5,672 citations by other scientists who have benefited from his research. That's the third thing we have to know from this ceremony. Poetry is very much a part-time endeavor. We have famous examples in America. The two that we all know about, I hope there are probably more, one is Carlos Williams, who was an active pediatrician throughout his career, and then Wallace Stevens, a lawyer who served as vice president of a very fancy insurance company in Hartford, again throughout the career. My own thesis advisor in Columbia University used to tell the story of he once went to a hotel and he met other high officials of that same insurance company. They knew Stevens, of course, but amazingly, not a single one of them had any idea whatsoever that Stevens wrote poetry. He'd won the Pulitzer Prize. Well, that didn't seem to matter. Anyway, we can conclude that poetry is not a very lucrative profession. Last week I saw the Metropolitan Opera's wonderful HD movies of movie of La Bohème. And if you know that story, there's a poet, Rudolfo. And he is in love with he's the tenor, of course. He's in love with, of course, the soprano, Mimi. And he says, one moment, physicians in his hospital know that he writes poems. Indeed, already has published 3 volumes. Do the nurses know? He's not at all the sort of poet who writes graffiti on walls, reads on empty lots. On the contrary, he worries about his Avaton. The collection's very first poem, and that which uses that word as a title, prohibits us from experiencing his secrets, his struggles, his tears. These are all a kind of no man's land between his soul and our curiosity. So the fourth thing to consider in this ceremony is to talk a little about this forbidding title. You've already heard about it a little bit. Avaton. If the book itself, in the book itself, it's defined as you've heard that, unapproachable, inaccessible place. But religiously, has a special definition as a sacred place forbidden to the uninitiated. It's an ancient Greek word. And in ancient Greek, it could mean the same, untrodden, impassable, inaccessible, unfordable for a river, but also uncontaminated, pure, chaste. It's very important for this poetry. Then there are very interesting usages, and very frequent ones, in the patristic literature. Here the word renders heaven inaccessible to evil, knowledge of God inaccessible to human senses, truth inaccessible to profane humans, the resurrected body inaccessible to passion, Christian life inaccessible to sorrows, the way to Christ inaccessible to sinners. So the Avaton can erect barriers in totally opposite ways. First against encroaching good, then against encroaching evil. Perhaps that's why Dr. BAFALOUKOS, who in the first poem seems to make his secret struggles and tears a no man's land between his soul and our curiosity, and thereby performing a therapeutic function for his soul, also admits that, on the other hand, poetry will enable him sometimes, he's getting out of the Avatar now, sometimes to meet someone, to feel another person's gaze and breath, to establish community, to somehow defy the Avatar that keeps his soul untrodden, impassable, and inaccessible. And when that happens, he writes again, this is in his words, for better or worse, enabling us now to witness his losses and remorses, his love, pulling this out of the poems, his loves, castrations, his subjectivities, transcendences, his stumbles along solitude's pathway, his redemptions from loss of youth and from nights spent in hand in a stranger's embrace. Yet no Avaton relinquishes its full power. Yes, the poems do enable us to access a portion of the poet's otherwise inaccessible no man's land, yet they never allow us to taste all the inwardness sequestered in this, remember, sacred place, forbidden to the uninitiated. In such ways, these texts both maintain and defy the Avaton. And I would say, I hope I'm right, that all good poetry does this in some way. There's always a mystery. There's always something above, beyond and above rational comprehension, above the senses. This something is there, but it's also pleasing. I like the way Dr. BAFALOUKOS expresses this in his prologue. He says, "Simasi ehin akusis tin synchordia, ton lexion senen rhythmo pu apalini tim psychimu." What matters is that you hear the word chords in a rhythm that soothes your soul. This means that the most essential ingredient of poetry, above and beyond any rational content, is music, the music of language. Consider the poem on page 58, Hypervasi, translated very correctly as transcendence. Yet in ancient Greek, the same word means an overstepping, and this carries on into modern Greek. It means an excess. You have the very common expression, hypervasi tu oriu tachititos, somebody exceeding the speed limit. The poem begins, si tusis elpida optin agapi, exoraizon dastin me hyperthetiko vathmo. Translated, you sought hope from love, adorning it to the nth degree. Exoraizon das is truly a word chord. Raizo, again, ancient Greek. It's in Hippocrates, and it means to recover from an illness. But it also can mean, and this would go with recovering from an illness, to grow easier, to rest from toil. In modern Greek, the compound seducing it with caresses is not only correct, but I would say brilliant, because to seduce can so easily be a word chord in English, meaning obviously the first meaning to attract someone something, to do something inadvisable, but it also can mean to powerfully attract someone in a positive way. We say, for example, that a melody seduces our ears with beautiful memories. Beyond all this, however, what seduces me in these three lines is the three-time repetition of the present participle. Exo raizondas, saginevondas, vinondas. I no longer worry what these words mean. I register them musically as things long and drawn out, precisely like what? Like caresses, hadia, which can be long and drawn out, and which can be certainly attractive, but also sometimes annoying. What happens next? The poet rests the seductively prolonged present participle until the penultimate line, filling in some of the intervening lines with short, sharp sounds. Mekripu ipsichi, ailo soma. Until we reach the participle, again, agapondas, loving. Loving what? Well, guess what? The transcendence. But maybe that means the overstepping, We're not quite sure. The transcendence of what? Of your subjectivity. What is that in Greek? Know what of your subjectivity in Greek is. Tis, I have to take in my breath to say it. Tis hypokimenikotitasou. Musically, the poem goes clunk at the end. After the seductive participles, the fascinating word chord of the title, the relief of short words in the middle, we have this monstrosity, which surely is making great fun of your precious subjectivity and maybe even of its transcendence. I've concentrated on this marvelous poem because it's so deliciously elusive in its rational content and so deliciously non-elusive as a collection of soothingly rhythmic word chords. This brings us to the huge problem of translating such poetry, maybe of all poetry, since English words will typically lack the multiple meanings found in the Greek words they render. For one thing, there's really no ancient English. Anglo-Saxon doesn't count. There's no ancient English to add meanings. And the English language, the English text can really speak musically. It can speak musically, but rarely in the same way as the Greek original. I've done a lot of translating, both of prose and poetry. And the major conclusion that I've come to as a result of all this is the certainty that every translation is a failure. Certainly in poetry, maybe also in prose, maybe less so. It's a shame that copyright restrictions typically prevent works from being retranslated for 50 or 70 years. Every generation, and the generation can be maybe 20 years, deserves a new translation of important poems. The second conclusion provided by my experience is that if a translator is asked, as Rodolfo is in La Bohème, if that's a way to make a living, the answer has to be hardly. Publication of translated work doesn't even help an academic get promotion or tenure. But the third conclusion is that translation is worth doing, is culturally extremely important, and can easily be a labor of love because it offers other satisfactions besides financial ones. And lastly, I conclude that it should be honest. The translation of the product of hard work, careful research, the willingness to seek help in cases where you cannot find your own solution. Incompetent, dishonest, and sloppy translations do exist and shouldn't. Most responsible translators will fall into one of two camps. Either, my text should not seem like a translation, should be entirely true to the new language. Or, my text should do its best to make the new language preserve the flavor, idioms, and unique virtues of the source language. In addition, the translator must decide, in the case of poetry, whether rhymed verse does or does not require rhymed translation, and to what degree the translation will mimic stanzaic form, line length, line division. The poet, the wonderful Greek writer Emeritus told me once, for instance, your line, my line, the line breaks must be exactly where mine are. The lines must be honored. Vassiliki Rapti, in her translation of this book, Avaton, honors the original line and stanza lengths 99% of the time. She strives for and achieves idiomatic English without Greek peculiarities, all of which is fine. I'll cite a very short example, which I picked mainly because it's so short. On page 94, the poem is called To Vathi Kokino. Zitusis pali exegesis. You sought, again, I'm going to translate it sort of in the way Greek sounds. You sought again explanations. No good in English. It's English too. Once again, you ask for explanations. O Eros δεν έχει απορίες. Love doesn't have questions, or maybe doubts. Becomes love doesn't ask anything at all. Nikazitis, idiochroma. Victories, defeats, same color. Doesn't work in English. Becomes victories or defeats are of the same color. To vathi kokinu tunu becomes the deep red of the mind. The translations, one and only interpretation, you might say, comes in the second line where we read, doesn't ask anything at all, instead of doesn't ask questions. I think this is an improvement on the original, because absolute silence is probably more appropriate when victory and defeat are exactly the same, as the poem also says. Thus the translator, even when conservative regarding form and content, can add touches here and there, something we discover frequently in this volume. The only thing I miss in the rendering of this poem, I guess I'm really joking now, is some equivalent for the original's tiny rhyme. It's not a rhyme poem, but it ends tu nu, which is a rhyme, as a kind of unexpected climax at the end. How can one do anything like that in English? You can't. I mean, I thought of how about, for instance, the mind's deeply leaded red, and certainly that's no good. So we'll leave it the way it is. Let's end with thanks that these poems are not only responsibly translated, but are accompanied beautifully with the paintings of Dimitris Mytaras. With luck, more bilingual volumes of this sort will continue to appear, thanks to the press and other adventurous publishers. And of course, let's hope as well that new translators will continue to appear.
Peter Bottéas left a career as a translator, reviser, and editor in Montreal to retrain as a psychotherapist in Boston. He is a member of the Advanced Training in Greek Poetry Translation and Performance Workshop at Harvard, and collaborates with Vassiliki Rapti on the translation and revision of Greek poetry and other literature. He occasionally does voiceover work and is an aficionado of Greek poetry set to music. Vassiliki and Peter.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Professor Ian. Thank you all for being here today, this afternoon. I'd like to start with a quote from the translator's note. First in Greek, and then Peter is going to read the translation. Όταν ο Δημήτριος Μπαφαλούκος μου εμπιστεύτηκε το έργο του για να το μεταφράσω, δεν ήξερα ότι θα έμπαινα σε μια υπέροχη περιπλάνηση, η οποία θα με οδηγούσε σε απάτητα μονοπάτια. Απάτητα μονοπάτια που καλούσαν τη φαντασία μου να τα ζωντανέψει μπροστά μου, σαν έγχρωμες φωτογραφίες σε κάθε του σταθμό, και έπειτα να αποδώσω τα έντονα χρώματά τους, με εκείνο το κόκκινο του αίματος να υπερέχει σε μια άλλη γλώσσα. Και εκεί ήταν που άρχιζε η περιπέτειά μου και μαζί και η αγωνία μου. Θα ήταν το ίδιο κόκκινο του αίματος και στην άλλη γλώσσα. Θα παρέμενε η ίδια γεύση, η ίδια αίσθηση της όρασης και στην άλλη γλώσσα. Θα έπρεπε κι εγώ να γίνω ζωγράφος με τις λέξεις. Γιατί αυτό ακριβώς είναι που κάνει ο Δημήτριος Μπαφαλούκος στην ποίησή του. Μπαίνει σε έναν διάλογο με τον καρδιακό φίλο του που πρόσφατα έφυγε, τον ζωγράφο Δημήτρη Μυταρά, και ζωγραφίζει στιγμές απόλυτου έρωτα για να τον απαθανατήσει.
When Dimitris Bafaloukos entrusted his poetry to me for translation, I did not know that I would embark on wonderful wanderings that would lead me to unknown pathways. Pathways that summoned my imagination to bring them to life before my eyes, like a color photograph at each turn, and then render their intense colors with the boldness of blood red into the other language. And that is where my adventure began, along with my angst. Would it be the same blood red in the other language? Would the same flavor, the same vision be retained in the other language? Should I too also be a painter with words? For this is precisely what Dimitrios BAFALOUKOS does in his poetry. He enters into a dialogue with his very dear, recently departed friend, the painter Dimitris Mytaras, with his own pen, draws moments of profound love to immortal Eros.
Το Άβατον. Εκεί που χτίστηκαν τα μυστικά της ζωής μου, εκεί που μάτωσαν τα δύσβατα μονοπάτια, εκεί που τα δάκρυα έγιναν γκρίζες θάλασσες, εκεί δεν θα μπορέσεις να καταργήσεις το Άβατον της ψυχής μου.
Avaton, where my life's secrets were erected, where blood marked the rugged pathways, where tears became grizzled seas, you will never erase the Avaton of my soul. Ο πίνακας κλέβει στο χρόνο, ταριχεύοντας δευτερόλεπτα ευτυχίας, διαστέλνοντας στιγμές, συστέλλοντας την πραγματικότητα. Άφησε τις αισθήσεις να χρωματίσουν τον καμβά που διάλεξες. Υπόγραψε αυτόν τον πίνακα. Δώσε του τις δικές σου διαστάσεις. Είσαι εσύ.
The painting. You steal time, preserving instants of happiness, expanding moments, contracting reality. Let the senses color the canvas you chose. Leave your signature on this painting. Give it your own dimensions. Be yourself. Επτά κόκκινες τουλίπες. Στα κανάλια των ελπίδων και των προσδοκιών κάναμε την ίδια ευχή, ολόιδια, αυτή που ξεκινάει από το μυαλό και τελειώνει στην ψυχή. Πάψαμε 7 τουλίπες κόκκινες και τις ακουμπήσαμε στο ευαίσθητο σημείο της ζωής και της αιωνιότητας. Εγώ και εσύ.
7 red tulips. In the channels of hope and expectations, we made the same wish, identical to the one that springs from the mind and ends in the soul. We painted 7 tulips in red and laid them on the sensitive point of life and eternity, me and you.
Υπέρβαση. Ζητούσες ελπίδα από την αγάπη, εξοραίζοντάς την με υπερθετικό βαθμό, σαγηνεύοντάς την με χάδια, δίνοντας σχήματα ακατανόητα στο πλήθος, μέχρι που η ψυχή ομολόγησε την ουτοπία της αναζήτησης. Άειλο σώμα η αγάπη, με αδιέξοδες κάποτε επιθυμίες. Αγκάλιασε αυτό που πραγματικά κέρδισες, αγαπώντας την υπέρβαση της υποκειμενικότητάς σου.
Transcendence. You sought hope from love, adorning it to the nth degree, seducing it with caresses, giving incomprehensible forms to the multitude, until the soul confessed the utopia of such a quest. Love is an immaterial body, sometimes with dead-end desires. Embrace what you truly gained, loving the transcendence of your subjectivity.
Πανσέλινος. Σκιές στο φεγγαρόφωτο της Πανσελίνου, άλλες χαμένες στο ασημόχρυσο μονοπάτι της θάλασσας, άλλες ζωντανές, σκιές μνήμες, σκιές ερωτικές, σκιές φαντάσματα που ζωντανεύουν κάθε χρόνο από το αυγουστιάτικο φεγγάρι για να ξαναγυρίσουν την επαύριο στο αναντήρητο σκοτάδι της απεραντοσύνης του ουρανού.
Full moon. Shadows in the light of the full moon. Some lost in the silver gold path of the sea. Others alive. Shadows of memories, shadows of love, shadows of ghosts. Enlivened each year by the August moon, only to return the day after to the undeniable darkness of the endless sky.
Ταξόφυλλα. Μια απόλυτη μοναξιά που δεν έχω συνηθίσει. Μονότονα και βαρετά όλα. Δεν ανοίγω ταξόφυλλα. Φοβάμαι το φεγγάρι μήπως και αυτό μ' αφήσει και το άπειρο της θάλασσας μου φαίνεται απειλή. Μήπως παρασύρει το λευκό βότσαλο που μου χάρισες όταν νόμιζα ότι με αγαπούσες.
The shutters. An absolute loneliness I'm not accustomed to. Monotonous and dull, all. I keep the shutters shut, afraid that the moon will also leave me. And the infinity of the sea seems to me like a threat engulfing the white pebble you once gave me, when I still thought you loved me.
Ο δρόμος της μοναξιάς. Προσπαθώ να μυρίσω τον καπνό από μια αγάπη που καίγεται. Προσπαθώ να γευτώ τη στάχτη από τα φιλιά που περίσσεψαν. Κτίζω το οχυρό μου παρατείνοντας τη νύχτα, μην έρθει το πρωί και ο ήλιος στείλει τη σκιά σου δίπλα μου. Μια γουλιά αναμνήσεων ακόμη και θα μεθύσω περπατώντας στο δρόμο της μοναξιάς.
The path of solitude. I strive to smell the smoke of a love that is burning. I strive to taste the ashes of your lingering kisses. I build my stronghold to extend the night, to keep the morning at bay, lest the sun cast your shadow beside me. One more sip of memories and I'll be drunk as I stumble on the path of solitude.
Η τελευταία λέξη. Δαγκωματιές στο σώμα που ματώνουν αποτυπώματα μιας ζωής χαμένης. Μην τις επουλώσεις. Ανοιχτές βγάζουν ήχους που πονούν. Γράφουν στο χαρτί στίχους. Ποτίζουν με δάκρυα το γιασεμί. Η κάφτρα του τσιγάρου έκαψε κάποια γράμματα. Δεν την θυμήθηκα ποτέ πια την τελευταία λέξη. Μια θάλασσα. Πέρα από το πρέπει και το μήπως, υπάρχει μια θάλασσα. Έλα να κολυμπήσουμε γυμνή, να αγγίξουμε τον ορίζοντα.
See, beyond the must and the perhaps, there exists a sea. Come and let us swim naked until we touch the horizon.
Η ουτοπία. Προσπάθησα να διαπεράσω τα μάτια σου, να αγγίξω την ψυχή σου, να δώσω στην αγάπη σου όνομα, τραγούδι, όραμα, ζωή. Ισορρόπησα σε σκηνή τεντωμένο της ύπαρξης και της ανυπαρξίας, προδομένος από την ουτοπία. Το βουβό κλάμα που πλημμύρισε το σώμα μου δεν το γαληνεύει. Η αγάπη δεν γιατρεύεται, γιατρεύει.
Utopia. I tried to pierce your eyes, to touch your soul, to give your love a name, a song, vision, life. I balanced on a tightrope between existence and non-existence, betrayed by utopia. The silent tears flooded my body without appeasing it. Love cannot be healed. It just heals.
Οι σκιές. Ζήταγες τα νύποτα από χείλη που τρέμουν. Άγγιζες τα πάτητα σε καρδιές που υποφέρουν. Φώναζαν οι σκιές, γυρεύοντας διέξοδο.
The shadows. You sought the unspeakable from trembling lips. You touched the untouchable in suffering hearts. The shadows cried, seeking a way out.
Ερωτικά σημειώματα. Σε περίμενα αφού γκραζόμενος τους ήχους του διαδρόμου, αναπνέοντας τη μυρωδιά σου γύρω μου, βαθαίνοντας τις ρητίδες της ψυχής μου, αναζητώντας την ειδονή στο γύρισμα του κλειδιού. Δεν ήρθες.
Love notes. I waited for you, listening to the sounds of the corridor, inhaling your fragrance around me, deepening the wrinkles of my soul, seeking pleasure at the turn of the key. You didn't come.
Άφησα μήνυμα στα σύννεφα. Το πήρες? Μίλησα στη θάλασσα. Το άκουσες? Τους έλεγα ότι σ' αγαπώ πιο πολύ από τον ουρανό, πιο ζεστά από τον ήλιο, πιο δυνατά από τον άνεμο. Ευτυχώς αυτοί με πίστεψαν.
I left a message in the clouds. Did you get it? I spoke to the sea. Did you hear it? I told them that I love you more than heaven. I love you warmer than the sun, louder than the wind. Fortunately, these powers of nature believed in me.
Δες στα μάτια μου το χρώμα της μοναξιάς. Μην τα προδώσεις. Ψηλάφισε στην καρδιά μου το βάρος της αγάπης. Μη με πετάξεις. Χάιδεψε την ψυχή μου, γαλήνεψε το μυαλό μου. Κι έλα γυμνή από μίσος, λύπη, ενοχές, διεκδικήσεις. Πρόσφερα πάντοτε την αγάπη. Αντάμιψέ με.
See in my eyes the color of solitude. Do not betray them. Touch the burden of love in my heart. Don't reject me. Caress my soul. Calm my mind. And come naked from hatred, sadness, guilt, vindications. I've always offered love. Do reward me.
Ενώνει το φως με τη θάλασσα η μορφή σου. Γαληνεύει τον ήχο των κυμάτων η φωνή σου. Φύλαμε να ανατείλει η ψυχή μου πάνω από τα τείχη της μοναξιάς. Νιώσε με να βρω τη δύναμη να φτάσω στην απάτητη άμμο της ευτυχίας. Άγγιξέ με.
Your silhouette unites the light with the sea. Your voice is smoothing the sound of the waves. Kiss me so that my soul is risen above the walls of loneliness. Feel what I feel so that I can find the strength to reach the traceless sandy beach of happiness. Touch me.
Καίγαν οι λέξεις. Ήταν δικές μου. Σφίστες. καίει η αγάπη. Είναι δική μας. Κράτησέ την.
The words burned. They were mine. Erase them. Love is burning. It is ours. Hold it.
Σαν να ζητούσα στα αστέρια κι ήσουν δίπλα μου. Παρακαλούσα να έρθεις κι ήσουν δίπλα μου. Έκλεισα τα μάτια και ονειρεύτηκα. Τα χείλη σου ακούμπησαν τα δικά μου. Αγάπη και όνειρο μαζί. Ήσουν δίπλα μου.
I looked for you among the stars, and you were next to me. I begged for you to come, yet you were next to me. I closed my eyes and I dreamt your lips touched mine. Love and dream in union. You were next to me.
Η λογική τετράγωνη και εγώ πώς να σε αγγίξω που έμαθα να τρέχω στη βροχή ξυπόλυτος αναζητώντας το άγνωστο.
Logic is square. Tell me how I can touch you, I who learned to rush in the rain barefoot, searching for the unknown.
Τετραγώνισε την τεθλασμένη της ομορφιάς, του έρωτα, της ζωής και δώσε της χρώμα, το γκρίζο, τελευταία επιλογή. Πρέπει να αδειάσω το μυαλό μου, να στεγνώσω την ψυχή μου, να ισοπεδώσω τον εαυτό μου για να παραμείνω ο ίδιος. Εάν θελήσεις, θα το κάνω.
Do square the zigzag line of beauty, of love, of life. Also give color to it, gray being the last option. I have to empty my mind, to dry my soul, to flatten myself, so that I stay firmly the same. If you want me to, I will do so.
Να μικρύνω το χρόνο, να μικρύνω την απόσταση, να μεγαλώσω τη δύναμη, να μεγαλώσω την ανάγκη. Όχι, να μην αλλάξω τίποτα, να είσαι εδώ, να είσαι εσύ, η απόλυτη και μοναδική αγάπη.
I should shrink the time, shorten the distance, increase the power, enrich the need. No, I should change nothing. You should be here. You yourself should be the absolute and unique love.
Thank you for coming. Of course, anytime. Because these last for so long that I can just work around.
And they recycle.
Yeah. I wanted to do it while they were like talking, but I was like, well, I'm going to edit.
The editor in me hates the white background. You know, the one that's dying right now.
Tell me about
Just
it.
at least, come on, give me some transitions. Give me some.
I feel it, but we'll make it.
You make it work. Are you recording?
Yeah, it's good. If you get time. I have much to work on. I'll even save the world and do this one better and remove a chair.